I'm joined now by someone whose work many viewers are probably familiar with, as he's worked on a number of Doctor Who related projects and has done all sorts of events. But he has actually worked on the show itself. So I would like to introduce sculptor and monster maker James Burgess. How are you?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, I'm not bad, thanks. And it looks like you've got plenty of company there. Is all of this your own handiwork?
Yes, it is. We've got a Pertwee Sea Devil here. The face is derived from an original nth generation cast that I tidied up a bit, but yes, I'd say that this is one of my latest creations, and we've got Sylvester Mccoy here, obviously, which I'm working on at the moment. I took him out to a few events last year as a sculpture, because I like to, when I have a display table, I like to take a piece of clay with me as well and sculpt something there, just to give people an idea of the process.
Well, of course, yeah, fantastic stuff, and I'm sure many people have seen your work firsthand. But I was interested as to how you actually came to work on Doctor Who itself, working on the SniperBots.
Well, I emailed the company Robert Alsop and Associates, who do a lot of Doctor Who monsters increasingly nowadays, and I just said I would really like to come along and do some work, and let me know if there's a, and I didn't know at the time, but they happened to be working on the tail end of series 11 at the time, so it was good timing. They were just working on the finale story, because if you remember, the SniperBots were in earlier in the series, and then they came back for the finale, and they needed 2 additional ones making, just to make up the numbers. Maybe they'd blown up the others, I don't know.
So, how much sort of background were you given to the character? Were you just told, here's a mold, get on with it, or did you have to go through sort of a similar process to what they would have done originally?
It wasn't even that. I wasn't given a name. I was told that somewhere in the building there was a mold which I had to find to fiberglass a couple of masks into. They said it's a yellow silicone mold. It will be around somewhere. So I went and had a look for it, and obviously this was a new design. I hadn't seen anything of it. They didn't give much of a description. I was looking all around the place, and if you ever go there, they've got the most amazing stockpile of molds for all kinds of franchises. So you're literally trying not to tread on Judge Dredd and things as you're walking around. And eventually, I said, and this was on the first day, so I was a bit nervous about all of this, and I said, I really can't find this yellow mold you're trying to. Well, it turned out it was green, and it was on someone's desk somewhere, but they found it. And I from that point on, I was in my element, because I do a lot of fiberglassing anyway. So from that point, just got busy on it. It was a fairly standard, sort of like a half mask, because they've got those big hoods on, which covers a lot of it, and it's quite infuriating actually how much amazing detail is on this sculpt that Stuart Curran designed, and then on screen all you see is like a rectangle with a light in the middle of their hood. It's all obscured. But yeah, there were some other bits on the costumes that I would, because it's a huge team of people all working on it, and we didn't even know what it was called, but there were the pieces, and we all kind of said, right, okay, you go and do that bit, and you go. So one day I was trimming pieces for like the fingers, and other days I might have been sticking padding inside the helmets, and they were unusual helmets, because there was no because obviously you've got the square with the light on the front. There's no actual forward facing vision. You can't look forward. You can look sort of sideways and downwards, but I'm not sure that I would have wanted to be in the shoes of the people wearing them. But I did love those costumes. I hope to do more like that in the future.
So how long would you been working on these particular characters? Because it must have been more than just the odd day, surely.
Yeah, I went down for 2 weeks. It was in the summer of 2018. It was really hot, so everything was, all the resin was going off very quickly. And yes, it started off, because I didn't know anybody. It started off kind of a bit nervous about it, trying to make the best first impression, and then by the end of the second week, it just felt like a real shame I had to go away. I wanted to carry on, but yeah, it was a, a, a hell of a commute, because I live in Northampton, which is nowhere near London, really. I had to get, I think it was a bus, and then 2 trains, and then a walk, and then the same back. And I get up at about 6:30 in the morning, and then come home at about 9 o'clock, which is all right if you're working on Doctor Who, because it doesn't feel like hard work. But I remember there was one night where, because obviously places like this, they're working on all kinds of things at the same time, different shows and things. And there was one night that they came in just at about when I was intending to go home, and they said, we've got this suit of armor that needs fixing up, and it needs fixing up now. And I suppose I could have left, but I stayed, and we did that, and I didn't leave till about 7:30. But such is the life, I think. Yeah.
Well, they've worked across so many iconic franchises and TV series and films. So how was it to actually be there working for them? And I imagine seeing some of these molds and costumes about the place.
It was fantastic. It was just like being at home, because I've got molds for things and castings all over the place, but these people were doing it for real. And it was like a huge building. On one side you've got all the sewing work, on the other side you've got all the model making work, and it's just, they do everything. um I felt in my element going there, certainly.
Well, of course, you do a lot of your own sculpting and casting work already. What did you particularly pick out from your time there? Was it just necessarily a different way of working or the odd technique?
That's a good question, actually. I think most of what I learned was maybe not necessarily how to create pieces, but certainly how to fit them together on a costume, if that makes sense. I think, I mean, since then I've made a few costumes of my own, not all monsters, but some of them are things like space suits, and just looking at how they put things together has given me a bit of a point in the right direction for that. They use a lot of contact glue, the stuff that you put on both sides, let it dry, and stick it. And there were these solar panels on the back of the SniperBots, which you never see on screen, but so much work went into them. And I remember being, on one of the days, I was given one of these jackets. Now the jackets were very well made, and I was told, now can you glue these solar panels on the back? And no pressure, but if you get them in the wrong place, you've ruined the whole jacket. We got there in the end. It was all right.
And more recently, you've combined this experience of both costume and sculpting side of things in a bit of restoration of one of the Warriors of the Deep Sea Devils. How did that come about?
The story has a bit of a reputation for being filmed in such a hurry, but no, the costumes were, the one that I got was miraculous in a way, because it contained all kinds of foam parts, like sofa foam and that sort of thing, but it was all in very good condition. I was given the sort of the tunic with the, whatever you call it, the skirt attached to it, and then also the trousers, and then 2 of the feet. There were no hands and there was no head. We decided, for the sake of, how much is it worth, at what point are you adding too much to it, that we weren't going to do anything with the hands. But the head, Matt from Toy Box Treasures managed to source a cast of, it was a replica, but it was cast from the original mold. and he sent it over to me. It needed quite a bit of work because it was a bit misshapen, but at least the detail was right. So what I did was there's a kind of resin that you can slush it inside the mask, and then when the resin cures, you can take a hairdryer to heat it up, and then like plastic, just mold it and shape it. And then what I did was I took a mold of that, cast it in wax, and restored some of the detail. In fact, the one here is actually molded from that mask. I learned a lot about those particular sea devils, and I did also film all of it. At some point, I'll edit together a video of just showing how the restoration went. The main problem with it was that it was made of a sort of faux leather material, where where it looks like it's kind of quilted all over the body with the scale pattern. It was because of the material, it was holding fine structurally, but there were cracks appearing all over it where the sort of coating of that material had just shrunk and dried, and it sort of had this eggshell effect all over it. The bulk of the work, I remember, was just sitting there patching them up and colouring all the cracks to make them not so noticeable. The finished product did look quite impressive. It was way taller than I am, and we got it on a mannequin and delivered it off safe to its new owner.
So something like that, where does your process begin? Do you look at the materials, the costume itself? How do you start it all off, really?
There was a limit to how much I could go into the source material, because unfortunately the big name best associated with them is Richard Gregory, and he had sadly passed away last year. But a good friend of mine, Toby Chamberlain, gave me some pointers on some of the techniques that he used. It was mostly to do with how certain parts of it had been made, which was helpful in what was missing. What we already had, obviously, it was quite easy to see what needed fixing. I think the best help for that project were two things. Firstly was the brand of paint that was used to paint them with, which I managed to then find the right colour for them to patch them up. And then the second was the thread, which doesn't sound like much, but because there are so many bits stitched together that then had to be replaced and added, I was quite, and I'm proud of that, because I found the thread that they used originally. But yes, I like to think that in some way helped the project.
Of course, another project you're working on with Toy Box Treasures is to build a Dalek from the original Shorecraft plans. How did that start life, that project?
Yeah, that's an ongoing project at the minute. I honestly can't remember exactly how it came around. We were just chatting about sort of how far you could go to recreate an original 60s Dalek. Because let's face it, the Daleks of the 70s and 80s, they're very exciting, but they were a bit battered by that point. The 60s Daleks they're still fresh enough off that production line that you can look at them and sort of see them as a real work of art. There are a few surviving props nowadays, which some of them we've managed to get reference from, and obviously a whole team of very knowledgeable experts, including Dalek 6388, who I'm sure you've heard of. They're famous for cataloguing every Dalek throughout history. We have picked a specific Dalek that we're going to replicate, and I have here the eye stalk from that. So far, I think this is, we've got a few sections, but this is the most of what's been assembled so far. It's all using the same build techniques as an original Dalek for all intents and purposes. I can't go into too much detail, but it's quite weighty. I imagine that the operators sitting inside the original Daleks must have had a bit of a struggle constantly lifting the eyes up and down. It's quite, compared to some of the ones I've made for my own Daleks, it's quite heavy. There's a lot of um, wood and metal and things in it.
So how different are Dalek building techniques then in the 60s to what you had done yourself on some of your own Daleks?
A completely unrecognizable process. Yeah. When I was making mine, and I've got a new one that I'm making now at the moment. The if you feel that something needs to be fixed down, you grab a screw and you put it in. But with this case, you've got a message round and say, what did they do back in the 60s? There is no banging a nail in. You know, you've got to kind of agree by committee what you're going to do, and it's a bit slower, but I think ultimately the experience of getting to sit inside a Dalek as would have been on set back then is going to be quite something.
But of course, Daleks aren't the only creature you've totally recreated. You've worked on things like Cybermen, Zygons, Ice Warriors. What's perhaps been the most challenging one you've done so far?
Whew, that's a good question. Zygons took quite a lot of effort from several people to get them put together, because there's so much that has to be stuck together. I envy Millennium Effects for being able to just sculpt up a Zygon, cast it in one go. The original Zygons, they were almost fabricated. You know, they had a fiberglass body shape, which we created as well. The biggest challenge is probably when you've got a monster to make that has lots of different bits. They either fabric parts met with latex parts, because of course a lot of them, like the Silurians, were made like that back in the day, and also when you've got parts to make that are, say, you've got eyes and teeth and claws that all have to be made separately and stuck onto a creature. So at the moment I'm doing it, it sounds like a minor monster, but it's very fun. I'm doing Fifi from the Happiness Patrol, and I've got to sort of start it by making the tiniest bits that you wouldn't even think about, like the claws and the teeth, and then sculpt the bigger bits and stick them in, and I've got to sort of problem solve what the properties of each of those things has to be, what has to be flexible, what has to be solid, does something have to be translucent, does it have to have hair punched into it? It's a big problem solving game, which I've learned over the, I don't know, 6 or 7 years I've been doing it now.
Would something like Fifi be a little bit more straightforward to work on? Because of course you've still got to capture a likeness, but it's not, you know, a human face such as Sylvester or Michelle Gomez.
I think it's a lot easier, actually. A monster as a human. I mean, when I'm saying that, I'm not saying that you can just throw clay together and there's your monster. But obviously, that monster was probably originally sculpted in maybe a day, maybe 2 days, possibly up to a week. But it was a certain amount of time that a craftsman, sat down and created it. So then for someone else to come and do it later, it's not quite so complicated as something that obviously you're sculpting from. In this case, it was just a wooden pole I had, and I just lumped clay on it, and I had nothing to work from. It was all trial and error, and it did get frustrating at times. But the sense of pride when it actually comes out the mold is immense. That makes it all worth it in the end.
So having done all of this, what's the next project? What's your next, I don't know, Doctor Who character or your own that you're keen to work on?
I have a couple of restoration projects that are going to be coming in. I can't say too much about them yet, because I don't know whether they want me to, but keep tuned, because I will probably have some more monsters from the classic series to restore fairly soon. what would I like to work? I think what I'd really like to work on is more personal designs. Obviously, a couple of years ago, I have here another mask. This one here, which you might have seen before, this was one of my own designs, and I just thought it would be a bit of fun. It wouldn't end up probably selling or being used for anything. Luckily, it did end up being used in something. It turned up for all of 2 seconds in the Sill film that came up recently. But yeah, I think that it's quite important for anyone like me who makes models, who has a craft like this, to at some point try and express their own ideas, because it's one thing to make a Doctor Who monster, and I found this. I can make any Doctor Who monster with enough time, but it's someone else's idea at the end of the day. And I've made a few personal pieces, and they feel really unique to me. But obviously, then getting them out there, I'm sure one day people will be interested in them as much as the Doctor Who, but certainly at the moment, people are saying, well, what's the next Doctor Who thing you're going to make? But no, personally, I quite like to make some more James Burgess work.
Well, quite rightly. And am I right in thinking most recently you've been busy with a space helmet?
Yes, you might be talking about this space helmet. It's a lovely sensation when you have to ask which space helmet you're talking about. But this one here, it's a steampunk space helmet. I tell you what this was. This was a wall clock. I had because I've redecorated recently. When lockdown came about, as part of that redecorating, I had a wall clock on the wall, which is this band here at the bottom. And I thought, it no longer fits in with the room aesthetic. So obviously I took it off and took it apart and sprayed it, and then the rest of it was sort of sculpted and built up on top of that. It's strange how ideas come about, but yeah, it was based off a wall clock, and all these rivets on here, because obviously being steampunk, it's got to have rivets all over it. These are from just bits and bobs that I've moulded over time. I've got lots and lots of little moulds of sort of rivets and bolt heads and interesting looking things. If I find an interesting looking thing, chances are I will pour some silicone on it and make a mould. And then next time I've got some spare resin lying about from a bigger project, I'll just pour it in there. I've got pots and pots full of rivets and interesting bits and bobs to stick on.
And you must now have quite a back catalogue of both aliens and parts. That must be great for future projects to be able to go back and perhaps use some of those.
Yeah. I've got. I won't turn the camera around right now, but I've got a great big shelving unit in front of me, and one of those shelves is completely dedicated to little moulds for bits and bobs. I'll show you one of them actually. I've got here. Actually, I've got two that might be interesting. Here's a slightly bigger one. It's a mould of a Cyberman connector that go on the arms. If you have a look at fairly recently, I made a Tomb/Moonbase style Cyberman, and obviously those ones have the vacuum cleaner hose and those big practice golf balls that everyone kind of recognises nowadays. And the thing I would say about vacuum cleaner hose and practice golf balls, they are not designed to be stuck onto a costume, and getting in and out of one of those costumes is a pain because you can't bend the arms properly. So in the end, this was an idea I had. I took one of those balls. You might be able to just see the sort of the detail of them. I took one and I sawed it in half, and I stuck it to a lid, and then sculpted some nodules at the sides, and then that gave me a sort of custom resin piece that is more like the Invasion Cyberman connectors, and you can stick much more flexible chrome shower hose to it. That was one of those things that maybe at the time, if they had had that, they might have done it. If they'd, because obviously later they did abandon the tubing. That was just one of those cases of accuracy or practicality. And if you're going to an event and you're going to be sweating in this thing, how comfortable do you actually want it to be? The other mold I've got here is a much older one. That is a sort of circular detail thing, which I think it was a lid or something I molded years ago. And when it came to do Mission to the Unknown, there was a bit of a moment of panic as I looked at the Dalek and thought, we're going to have to do this thing up if it's going to be up to standard for something like this. And I found that actually the inner ring of this model was absolutely the right size to stick a baked bean tin, which is what the original front of the eyeball was, stick it on, pour resin into it, and there you have it. You can barely see it on screen because it's black and white and it's so, shadowy. But yeah, you can just see this sort of 3-point design on the front of the eyeball, and that was another case of just having something around that happened to be the right size and shape, coming in useful.
So have you found that actually wearing, I suppose in some cases operating what you've made, influences how you make the next one?
Yes, I think it's very important if you're going to make costumes for other people to wear, to have an idea of at least what that costume is like. I started as a cosplayer and just, I think, well, the Dalek operating was the very first thing, and then I moved into cosplaying and things. So very much from that wearing things side of things, and then you become aware of, is it going to be breathable? Is it going to be hot? How heavy is it going to be? It sounds like a small thing, but there are a few instances I could think of where a prop maker has, maybe they don't necessarily wear the costumes very often, and they go and make a costume which looks absolutely amazing from the outside, but getting it on is the most uncomfortable thing, and you've got to squat and bend in unnatural shapes, and after about half an hour it's quite painful. So yeah, I would definitely say wear them, go to events wearing costumes and get a feel for it. It really transfers into all sorts of things.
Well, on the note of some of the challenges of wearing some of these costumes, which no doubt those that wore them in the 60s or 70s would say the same, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, James. We've touched upon just some of your work, and I know there's an awful lot more projects that I'm sure viewers would be keen to ask you about when we're able to do events again. So thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure.